All right. So, guys, it's time for the podcast. And as we let a few people tune in, I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit of what I've been up to. So, this week, I got my ticket down. I'm going to a business event in Kelowna early in May. I'm going back to Vegas in 2 weeks to spend some time at the UFCPI with the incredible staff down there. And I got that all booked in. I dropped a lot of money to do all of these things, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that today on the show because that is something that is super important, something that's been on my mind a lot, and something that I know is going to help all of you guys out as well. So we're going to get into it very quickly. Guys, as you tune in, remember, we're going to do some Q&A at the end, so make sure you stick around. But we're going to get into the show really, really quick. We're going to go 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the number one show for athletes looking to gain an edge on their opponents and build their dream careers in sport. I am your host, Kenny Dusseault, and today we are going to talk about putting yourself in the room. Now, when I talk about putting yourself in the room, what I'm saying is that if you want to be great at something, if you want to achieve high levels in whatever it is you're doing, you need the right people around you. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've been up to the last little while, and then just, talking about, again, putting yourself in the room. So back in January, I was in Vegas for an event that had nothing to do with like my coaching business specifically, just learning more about like investing, some other things. I had somebody close to me was speaking, so I went down mostly to see my business coach speak at this event. But then while I was down there, I got the opportunity to spend a couple of days shadowing at the UFCPI. If you don't know, I worked with Chris Curtis for his training camp coming into his fight in January. And so when I was down there, I met up with him. He brought me down to the PI. He introduced me to the head strength coach there. And so I got to spend 2 days at the UFCPI, just like watching sessions, learning from the team there. And it was phenomenal. And so as I was wrapping up the time that I was spending there, the head coach of the whole place, Gavin Pratt, absolute stud of a human being, told me, he was like, look, man, if you're ever back in Vegas, like, let me know. And we're more than happy to have you back for a couple of days and, do this again. And so in 2 weeks, I'm going back down and I'm going to spend a few more days down there with Gavin and the team. And that is what I want to talk about today, because going down to Vegas for a few days, I don't know if you've been there, it's not exactly cheap. You've got to, like, for me, I've got to get the flight down there. I've got to get accommodations, food, travel around the city. Like, the expense adds up, right? But the opportunity to spend a couple of days working in a $12 million facility with some of the highest level people in the industry is worth so much more than that. And that's the idea of putting yourself in the room. Because I know even myself a couple of years ago, if I'd gotten that invitation, I would have been like, oh man, like, that's great, but it costs so much money to get down here, and like, oh, I won't be able to because of this, or this. Whereas now I understand that I'm like, yeah, it costs a lot of money to get down there. It costs a lot of money to spend a few days there, but the return on the investment is so much higher than the investment itself, right? And that's the important thing that we've got to understand. And this is something that I see a lot of athletes struggle with as well. Right? They take the attitude of wanting to just figure everything out on their own. They take the attitude of like, oh, I wish I could, go travel to that gym, or I wish I could do this, or I wish I could do that, but I don't have the money, I don't have the time, and we let the reasons get in the way, right? So that's something that I've got to really reinforce with you guys. That's something I really want you guys to understand with this episode, is the importance of doing that. So all in all, I think I'm spending about $1,200 to go down there for 3 or 4 days with everything included, food and all of that as well. And the reason I'm doing this is because even in just the 2 days that I was down there the last time, first of all, it's inspirational, right? Getting to walk around the gym, while I was there, while I was watching sessions, I got to, see Alexander Volkov, Dan Ige, Kennedy. I can't even remember how to pronounce the dude's last name. Another UFC, I think middleweight, welterweight. Jamal Hill was training with one of the other coaches while I was down there. Like, there were a lot of high level names walking around the facility, hitting their training sessions, all of that stuff. So it's inspirational being in that kind of environment. But the next thing is the education. Literally from spending 2 days down there, I was able to first off pick out a lot of the things that, obviously I don't have the budget that these guys have or anywhere remotely near it. But I was able to pick out a lot of the things that, they might have more data behind why they do things a certain way, but I was able to pick out a lot of things that I was doing similar, just obviously on a much cheaper budget with much cheaper equipment, which was, very good for the confidence. I've always known, because I see the results my athletes get, I've always known that the things we're doing work, right? There's no doubt about that in my mind. But to go into a facility like that and see similarities between how they were running their sessions and how I was running mine, just reinforces the confidence that much more, right? Because I'm seeing these guys at the top of the world, top of the sport, doing similar things or performing similar sessions as what I'm giving my athletes. So for the confidence, that was huge. And then finally, I was able to see the things that I wasn't doing that they were doing. I was able to see the things that, Gav and his team were programming in for the athletes down there that I wasn't thinking about, or that I wasn't hitting the same way, or that I, hadn't put into programs before. And then I was able to ask, I was able to say like, hey, I saw you doing, this, and this with this guy. Like, what would be the idea there? Or what are we working on here? What's the thought? And then have him explain it. And I was able to take those things and bring them back to my own programming. Right. So by making the investment to come down there again, my goal is to go down more prepared with questions. So go down more prepared with, the things that I need to work on within my own programming, my own coaching, so that as I'm down there, I can get a better feel for how they do they do those things. And I can come more prepared with questions so that I can take away action steps to improve my own business. And coming back to the point of putting yourself in a room, this is obviously a very easy example when it comes to coaching. If you're able to put yourself in a room with coaches that are higher level than where you're at, then do that, because there's going to be a lot to learn. But this is where it comes back to the same thing with athletes as well, right? If you're an athlete right now and you're listening to this and you have big goals for your sport, you've got to understand that you need to do things that other people aren't willing to do. Because if you're doing all the same things as everyone else in your gym and everyone else in the gym down the road and everyone else in the gym in the next city, how do you expect to separate? How do you expect to go further than where they're going? Right? And a lot of the time when I have that conversation with people, one of the first things that can come back to, again, time, money. And I understand it, because I'm taking 3 days away from my own business, everything that I do, to go down here and spend the days learning. And that is, something that is like something that's difficult to do, because obviously that's, days away from the thing that I'm building myself. And on the other hand, I'm also investing, I believe, about $1,200 to go down there for the 3 days to spend the time at the PI and be around those coaches and make sure that, I have a place to stay, I have transportation and all of that as well. And when it comes to investing the time and investing the money, I'm very fortunate, because I've put myself in a position where I am actually able to do that now. I've got the business set up that I can run it from a distance. I've got the time, I've got I've put myself in a position where my business is doing well, and I'm able to put that money towards a trip like that, especially when it's going to come back and help all of my athletes. But let's say you're not in that position right now. Let's say you're thinking, I'd love to go travel to train at a different gym, or I'd love to go, invest in another coach or do whatever it is, but I just don't have the funds. There's a couple of things that you've got to think. Where a lot of athletes go is they say, I don't have the money. And so they just say, I don't have the money, so I can't. But what you've got to ask yourself now is, how can you put yourself in a position where you can? Because again, when we come back to the big goals, if you have big goals for your sport, you need to be willing to do the things that other people aren't willing to do. Things like traveling to train, things like investing in other coaches, things like, hiring nutritionists, strength and conditioning coaches, spending money on recovery, all of these things. And if you're not in a position to be able to do that, the number one thing that I would ask you is, where is your money going? Like, if you're working a 9-to-5 job right now, making, I don't know how much money, where is that money being spent? Because a lot of the time, when you actually look at where your money's being spent, you realize that you have a lot more than you thought. It's just going to different things. Now, some of those things are obviously going to be important. You need to put food on the table. You need a roof over your head. You need transportation to and from work. Like, some of those things are obviously very important. But I'll speak to athletes quite often that, they'll say, well, I don't have money to travel to train, or I don't have money to hire a strength coach or a nutritionist or any of that stuff. But then they're eating out 3 to 4 times a week, spending $20, $30, $40 every time they eat out, right? Right there, that's money that could be going towards furthering your career. That's money that could be going towards putting yourself in that better room around those higher level people that are going to help you grow, right? When I moved to Calgary in the first place, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but I got back to like, when I moved to Calgary, I was in a gym for the first time with coaches that were actually making a living coaching. This was the first time I'd seen this, and this is what I wanted to do forever. So I knew I needed to do whatever I could in order to stay at that gym. And so immediately I started auditing where I was spending my money. I realized that even though I was buying groceries every week, which was obviously very important, I was buying a lot of stuff that I didn't really need to buy. So I started auditing what groceries I actually needed, and I cut my grocery bill down about in half, which every week was about $50 to $60 that I was now saving towards being able to keep myself in the room that I knew I needed to keep myself in, right? So those little things that you're willing to do are going to continue to separate you from the rest of the pack. So at that gym, as an example, as I was, auditing my spending and doing all of this, I was able to save a lot more money. I was able to put myself in the gym more. I was able to see myself succeed at that gym and later on succeed in my own business. Whereas a lot of the people that were at that gym at the same time telling me that they wanted to, coach for a living, they wanted to work with high-level athletes, they wanted to do this, this, and that, they aren't even coaching anymore. Because they weren't willing to make those little sacrifices. They weren't willing to cut down the grocery bill. They weren't willing to not eat out a couple times a week. They weren't willing to audit the spending and do what had to be done to keep themselves in the room. Right? So when it comes to putting yourself in that room, the reason that, again, I'm going back to the UFC PI, the reason that I, also a separate topic, but bought a ticket to go to Kelowna for a week to another business coaching event to continue to help me grow and scale the business that I'm building right now, is because as much as that money hurts when it comes out, I understand that when I'm willing to put the time, the work, the effort into making sure that I get my money's worth for the trips that I'm going on, I'm going to be able to come back, and not only am I going to be able to make that money back, but I'm going to be able to make even more based off of the things that I'm learning, my athletes getting better results. And as my athletes get better results, more and more people coming in the door because of it. You guys get what I'm saying? So if you're in a position right now where you legitimately don't have the finances to put yourself in those rooms that you need to put yourself in, really, you've got 2 choices. Number one is you can let that be the reason that you don't do it. You can let that be the reason that you keep doing the same things as everybody else. Or number 2, you can figure out what it is you can do to put yourself in a situation where you can put yourself in that room. Whether that's auditing your spending, like I was talking about, whether that's finding a new job that you're going to be able to make a little bit more money, whether that's picking up an extra shift at your current job so that you've got a little bit more disposable income, whether that's working on your social media accounts so you can start taking on some sponsors that can help you pay for some of these things, whatever it might be. You've got to understand that, number one, putting yourself in these rooms is not a negotiable thing if you want to be great at what you do. And number 2, if you're not in that position, you've got to be able to put yourself in that position. Everybody has the financial trouble. Everybody has the time trouble. Everybody can't do it for some reason or another. But the things that separate the people who stay in the business, the things who separate the athletes that make it to the top, is they figure out a way to do it anyways. So guys, that's it. That's all. I hope you got some value from that. I hope you learned something. If you did, I would love to know what it is. As always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will catch you on the next episode. Instagram, we're doing a little bit of Q&A, so make sure you stick around. I'm just going to exit out of the other stream here, and then